Hello everybody. We're going to take a look at this SATA JET NR2000 today. Give a little bit of background on it, some differences in the models, and do a complete teardown, clean, and reassembly. These initially came out in late '99, I believe, as a model year for the 2000s. Hence the name NR2000. I've actually got some of the original sales literature for it. And I'll see if I can put some still shots at this at the end of the video so you can actually read it. These were a great little gun when they came out. A huge improvement over the NR95, in my opinion anyway. I purchased this one in late '99, and it's still operational. I mean, it still sprays great. So anyway, let's start taking it apart and see some of the differences on it. Now, if you have one of these old SATA NR2000s, some parts are still available. Some parts are not, and some of the things that aren't available anymore can be damaged and ruined by incorrect disassembly and reassembly. So you want to be careful that you're doing it correct, and there's some things that you shouldn't try to service. So the first thing we're going to do to tear this gun down to clean it out is remove the needle stop. This can come off, and we'll adjust this later, but this piece here just sets how far back the needle goes. So you can actually set it so you don't have a full trigger pull. We're going to take the spring out and the fluid needle. This is one part that I don't think is available anymore, and these can be damaged fairly easily. So you want to be careful with this part. Try to work over carpet or a padded work surface to avoid dropping it and damaging it. Because if you drop this thing on a concrete floor on the tip, it's not going to work good. Okay, the next step is we're going to remove the air cap. Set that aside. And finally, we're going to use our SATA spanner wrench to remove the fluid tip. You never want to remove this fluid tip with the needle in place. You can damage the needle by doing so. So always be sure you have the needle out when you remove this fluid tip. Now, for most of your routine cleaning, this is about as far as you're going to need to disassemble. This gives you access to flush everything out and really access to most anything that gets really dirty with the paint. Usually it's this area inside the fluid tip and the needle that get the dirtiest. Your air cap is going to get some overspray back on it as you paint, but for the most part, a nylon brush and some lacquer thinner cleans the air cap up real well, and the exterior of the body. So what we will do now is get a little deeper into this gun. Okay, we've already partially disassembled this for a quick clean. The needle stop and needle are out, the air cap and fluid nozzle. So we're going to go ahead and tear this gun down the rest of the way. You're going to want to do this every once in a while to get all the little passages and to maybe do some maintenance on it if you're starting to have some trouble. So what we're going to do is this little black ring in here is going to get pulled out. This is called the air distribution ring. As long as you take care of these, they're really not going to wear out. For the most part, it's going to be hard to do. But they did actually sell kits of the air distribution rings in case you damaged one or just wore one out. But SATA actually had a tool that shipped with the gun to pull this thing out without damaging it. If you've got one of these old guns, chances are you don't have this tool. You can make do, maybe a couple paper clips or something. You can see the profile, it's just a couple of hooks that slide in here. And pull out. You can see the back of the gun has 3 holes. Those bottom 2 are air passages. And that distributes the air differently for the different patterns, going between a round pattern and a fan pattern. The top hole is just a guide that this little pin on the back of the air distribution ring fits into. It's just keyed so that when you reassemble it, it lines up correctly. So we're going to set that aside. The next thing we're going to do is pull off the trigger. And the trigger is held on by 2 little E-clips or C-clips, whatever you want to call those. And they just pull out. The small screwdriver. The top one usually comes out a little bit easier, but be careful and be ready to retain this because these things fly pretty easy. So you can see a little clip. We're going to set that aside, and the lower one sometimes tries to just spin, so it's usually easier to use a couple of screwdrivers, one to keep it from spinning and the other one to start to push it off until you get a little gap. Then once you have a little gap, you can usually push it out. Again, that's that little clip that holds the trigger on. Okay, now these 2 pins are just going to pull out at this point. The lower pin has a hole that the needle rides through. So you got to be sure you get them back in the right spot, otherwise your needle's not going to go back in. The upper pin pulls out. It's a solid pin. Now underneath the trigger, as you pull it off, there is a bent washer. And that washer just basically takes the slop out of the trigger. You want it, when you reassemble, you want to be sure that it goes back on the same side that has the E-clip is the correct position for it. Okay, now that that is off, this air piston pulls out. So we're going to set that aside. This is the air micrometer on the back of the gun. Small Allen key here. And again, this tool usually shipped with the guns when they were new, but it should be just a standard metric Allen key. That is spring loaded, so when you take the pin out, it's going to bounce back. You can see it's threaded on the end, so you shouldn't have much trouble putting that back in. It's pretty obvious how it goes. Now this assembly will slide out. And what this does is you can turn it to adjust the amount of airflow out of the gun. Kind of meter that back. This piece will disassemble. There's a screw in the end of it, but honestly, you really shouldn't have to take that out. You can quite often get a little brush in there to clean it out. But honestly, this is in your air system. It's really not going to get very dirty. You know, maybe every few months you can pull this out and give it a quick clean, but it's really not going to need much. This piece just slides off that spring. We'll set those aside. And you can see we're getting it torn down pretty good. This is another tool that shipped with the SATAs. Sorry, I know SATA is the correct pronunciation, but they were SATAs to me for a long time, so you'll probably hear me call it both. Any Allen key is going to work here to take this out. This tool, you'll see us use it later, and you'll see why it's rounded on the end. But for now, we're just going to pull this out. And now you can see through the gun there. There's no reason to take that plastic piece out. Again, you can clean that up with some thinner and a nylon brush without any issue. This is your fan control on the gun. Again, there's really not much reason to take this out, other than if you want to take this control knob off. Sometimes they just get dirty with overspray. Sometimes it's easier just to take it off to clean it and to kind of clean under it. That just lifts off with the screw. Again, you can throw that in some thinner. Nylon brush cleans up real nice. And again, kind of a nylon brush underneath this to clean up a lot of this. This is the actual valve that controls the fan control. Our SATA spanner wrench will fit that. And unscrew. But again, this is your air system. It's really not going to get very dirty. Put that threads on and off to control where the air is going and that distribute between these two holes. There's a little green O-ring on here that I'm just going to leave on. That can come off. If you don't reassemble this correctly, it's very easy to damage that O-ring. It'll basically get cut as it threads back on and tightens. I'm not sure you can get those anymore. You could probably replace it with a standard O-ring if you find the right size. Screw here on the bottom. just remove this little plastic piece. That just comes off. These plastic pieces were just an identifier. The guns, when they came out, actually came with a set of 4 different colors. And the reason was, if you had several different guns in your cabinet, different needle sizes, you could put a different color plug on each one to quickly identify which gun is which. I've got a 2000 RP that I always kept a blue plug on to identify as a clear coat gun. So we've pretty well got it stripped down now. There's really no reason to ever take this out. And on the digital guns, this is a non-digital obviously, but the digital guns, this is a 3000 that has the digital display. If you take that out on a digital gun, the digital portion's not going to work anymore. The booklet says you're actually going to have to send that back to SATA to get repaired, and I'm not sure they would even work on these NR2000s anymore. So you definitely don't want to take this piece out. And while we're talking about the digitals, the digital display on the NR2000 is very similar to this on the 3000. You can see there's 2 screws that hold this panel on. Do not remove these screws. This is non-customer serviceable. Again, if you take these pieces out, it's not going to work anymore correctly. SATA says that you need to send the gun back to them to get rebuilt and operational again. There is no battery under here. There's no reason to take this out. On the digital guns, if you flip it over, there's a round plug on the back side. And if we remove that round plug, there's our battery that runs the digital control. So there's no reason to remove the plug from the other side. Now, on these early NR2000s, the packing for the needle is on the front. And by early, the info I have says that serial number 200,000 and below, this is serial number 27,000, 200,000 and below is going to have a front packing set. On serial number 200,000 and above, the packing set for the needle is on the back side. And that will look like this NR3000 here. And that, if you have the rear style, that's where we need this tool. This tool inserts from the rear. And pulls out. You can take it out with a standard Allen key. But reassembly is much easier with this special tool, because what it does is it lines up all of the parts as you assemble them. Well, the packing's not coming out of that, but I will demonstrate how to reassemble that packing in a little bit on that rear packing design. For the early guns, they use a front packing set. And if you've got one of these, it's kind of obvious why they changed. There's a lot of paint that will build up around that packing set in the front, in the fluid area. It's kind of hard to clean out. So they actually had a tool that shipped with them that was kind of a galvanized extruded piece of metal that slipped down over that nut, and you put the spanner wrench on the back side to take it out. I couldn't find mine, so just I believe it's a 7mm socket. Yeah, 7mm will do the same thing. We're just going to put it on that nut. Break it loose. And we're going to spin that out. Okay, I'm going to move those parts. So here's our parts underneath that front packing set. We have the nut that holds it in place. I'm not sure you can see in there, it's kind of dark. The actual needle packing, a brass washer, and a spring. What that needle packing does is it rides on the needle, and that gives us our rear seal to the gun to keep paint from going on and exiting out the back of the gun. If you've got a gun that is leaking paint out the back, your needle packing is shot. As this works, eventually you're going to get some wear on the needle. So, I mean, that could be your issue too. If you've got a gun that as you spray kind of sputters, you've got an air leak somewhere, and this is a likely culprit, that it is actually sucking air past this as you're spraying. So that's one of the things to look for if you have a gun that's sputtering, as you paint as either a worn needle or more likely the packing. And those actually could be bought, probably still can, in a kit for the NR2000. I've had these in a long time, so I would assume they're still available, but I don't know for sure. You used to be able to buy a set to replace these, and this has obviously been well used. Originally came off the gun. Pretty sure these are not available anymore, but it would actually come with a new fluid tip, needle, air cap, air distribution ring. But anyway, that is pretty well torn down as far as you're going to want to on this gun. That's going to give access to everything. There's a couple of plugs here. You're not going to mess with those. Those are left over from machining on the gun, as they machine some of the air passages and then permanently plug them. So, guess we will get into cleaning this thing next. Alright, we're going to give everything a good cleaning on this now. The best way to do that, especially with a non-digital gun, is just to submerge everything in thinner. Let it sit for, I don't know, at least an hour. And then just start taking a nylon brush to everything, cleaning it up. If it soaks for a little bit, most everything's going to come right off the nylon brush without much trouble. This is a SATA gun brush that's shipped with all the guns. They're real handy, good size for everything, but it really helps to have some other brushes and stuff too that didn't come with the gun. One thing I would suggest is to get an actual spray gun cleaning kit. These come with lots of stuff. You know, here's a nylon brush that is great for just scrubbing all these little recesses in the gun. That's going to do the vast majority of your work. Some other brushes for getting into different small parts. One thing you want to look out for with a lot of these kits is they are just bare metal on the end. SATA actually folds some nylon over, so you're really not gonna jam it in there and hurt something. If you're cleaning your gun with the needle packing in place, which you're going to most of the time, if you just jam one of these brushes in there, you could actually be scarring up that needle packing, and then it's going to start leaking on you. So you'd want to be careful about that. Just keep it in mind if you're dealing with a brush that has some exposed brass parts. You know, a lot of these kits have lots of different size brushes for getting all these small air passages on the gun. You always want to use a brush that is sized correctly for what you're doing. If it's not going to easily fit in, don't use it. You could damage parts. These fluid nozzles can actually get damaged pretty easy by incorrect cleaning. And like I said, I don't think you can replace these anymore. So you're going to find a brush that fits correctly. And if this has been soaking for a while, it's going to clean up real easy. So the air cap, and I guess I forgot to take this apart earlier. There's actually a metal ring on this air cap that we can expand just a little bit, slide it up. And that air cap's going to come apart just a little bit further. If we do this, we want to be careful with this black O-ring in here. Try not to damage this. It sits in a little recess. I don't even like to take those out. You shouldn't need to. You can get your brush, clean in there, clean all your exterior parts. But one thing that gets real dirty on these guns, if you don't take care of them, are all these tiny little air passages. They are minute, and they're balanced. If you have some that are a little bigger on one side than the other, it's not going to spray correctly. Do not use the incorrect tool to clean these. Cleaning kits actually come with some little brooches. SATA actually had a kit. And let me see, I believe it's actually on this brochure right there. And they are cleaning needles. If you look at the end of it as I rotate it, you might be able to see it kind of flash every once in a while. That is because they're filed to a needle point, but they're also ground. They're not round, they're triangular shaped. And what these are designed to do is to slip into these little holes, and you spin them, and that triangular shape will actually clear out the paint without enlarging the hole at all. So you can do that to spin and actually clean out those little air passages. This is really about the only correct tool to use to get these cleaned out without damaging them. You can use a little brush, as long as it's not too big, to clean out these air horns. What I like to do cleaning these guns is to just get a container, drop the gun in, and your loose parts filled up with thinner and just let it soak. You really don't need to submerge the whole gun if you don't want to. I never like to submerge the whole guns on the digitals. I like to keep the digital portion out of the thinner. I don't like to submerge it. So if you've got a non-digital like this, you could do it in like a small flat pan, like a brownie pan. That works great too. But like I said, if you've got a digital like this, I like to put it in and soak it with the digital portion out of the thinner. Okay, so there's really not that many parts to these guns. I know when you're taking it apart it seems like it, but when you get them all out there's really not that many. But we need to reassemble it correctly or we could damage the parts. And there's some little things we can do putting it back together that are going to make your life a lot easier using it. So a lot of these parts aren't really going to matter too much the order we go in, but some do. So I'm just going to start down here at the bottom and put this identifier plug back in. Now I'm going to put this piece back in. And just snug it. We don't want to over tighten it, but you don't want it loose either. So just a good snug. This air distribution valve. One thing you want to use on several parts of this gun is actually a spray gun grease. This is actually made by SATA. I believe this size shipped with some of the guns. They actually sell it in a much bigger tube, which I have at work, that is honestly like a lifetime supply if you buy one. I've had it for probably 20 years and haven't seemed to touch it yet. But this is going to make a lot of these parts work better and keep some from being damaged. So what we want to do on this little gasket is we want to put a little bit of grease. You don't need much. And I'll put a little bit where it actually mounts to. On this particular piece, what I'm doing is just making sure that as I tighten, I'm not pinching and cutting that O-ring. If you do it dry, there's a good chance you're gonna cut that O-ring. Then you're gonna have to figure out a replacement for it. And again, don't over tighten, just down snug. Find out where that valve is located. That's all the way open. It's got an indicator on it, a little mark. So once I have it all the way open, I'm just going to adjust it just for a quick reference for me as to where it's at. That way I can glance at it and know that it's at the full open position. Don't need to do that, it's just my personal preference. Now I'm going to hold the actual ring as I tighten it, so I'm not putting a lot of extra torque on that valve as I tighten this. Okay, now we're going to reassemble this piece onto the spring. And again, we're going to use some grease on this. You don't need much, just a little bit. That's just going to kind of help with the way the trigger pull feels. Things are just going to slide a lot easier, a lot smoother. So that piece goes in there like that. We're going to line this up with the cutout to the bottom. Hold it in place. And then that little piece goes through that cutout. Now I'm having to hold against the spring tension with my thumb until I get this tightened up. Okay. There's our air micrometer back in place. I'm going to go ahead and put the air piston rod back in. A little bit of lube on that. And it just slides in. Let's go ahead and put the trigger assembly back on it. So again, the pin that has the cutout is obviously for the needle. It has to go on the bottom. We're just going to set that little clip on there. And push it on home with our little screwdriver. I think it's usually easier to get it to that point before you slide this little washer back in here, because it kind of helps retain everything. Okay, other pin. Slides through. Captures that little washer. And again, we're going to push that clip on. There you go. Okay, let's go ahead and put our packing back in this. And I will show you the two different ways for the two different guns. Okay, we're going to reinstall the needle packing now. As I said before, there's two different versions on this gun. Guns with serial number 200,000 and below have a front packing that installs from the front. 200,000 and above have a rear packing that installs from the rear. I'll show you both styles and how to put those both back together. We're going to go ahead and start with this front packing version. And usually the easiest way I have found to do it is to use this tool. We're going to slide it through the socket. Slide this piece on. Slide our needle packing on. The little brass washer. And the spring. I've put a little bit of that SATA gun grease on the parts before I put them in. I'm going to put a little bit more on the threads here. Now, as much as anything, what that grease does is it just seals everything and prevents any air leaks that will cause the gun to sputter. Okay, now I'm going to insert, and that Allen key is keeping everything aligned. The socket is going to tighten the nut. We're going to snug it, but not over tighten it. And that packing set is reinstalled. That's the front packing version. If you don't have that tool, you can try to use your needle through the socket to do the same thing, to align everything. Just be real careful with the tip and try not to damage it or to bend the needle. Now for the rear packing design, and this is a SATA 3000, but it's the same style packing, so we can show how to do that. And this is what the tool is really made for. We've got the parts for the packing installed on that round portion. The packing, the spring, and the little nut. It's going to insert through the back of the gun, compress the spring, and tighten the packing down, just like so. Again, if you don't have this tool, what you can try to do is insert the needle through the center, get it to about there, try to use some tweezers or something to install your parts onto the needle. You know, of course, this is centered up in the hole. And then gingerly pull it out as you're pushing in with a standard Allen key to tighten it. And that should keep everything aligned. It's a little harder if you don't have the correct tool, but it is doable. So we've got the packing back in. What we're going to do next is reinstall our air distribution ring. Going to use a little bit of grease on that aligning tab, and it's going to help it find its home. You don't have to worry about fish eyes or contamination with this grease. It is designed to run with the spray guns. Don't overdo it, but use a little bit to help you with the reassembly. This is sometimes a little bit difficult getting that alignment pin lined up. That pin is going to go into that top hole, if you can see it. So just kind of visually set it in there, and then you might have to twist it a little bit as you're pushing it in, but you'll feel when it goes into place, and it's going to slide back all the way. Okay, our air distribution ring is back in place. Now we're going to reinsert our fluid tip. This fluid tip is another place we want gun grease on these threads. And again, this is to prevent any sort of air leak while the gun runs. If your gun's sputtering, chances are you've got an air leak here, around the packing, or around where the fluid comes into the gun. Going to use our universal spanner wrench and get it snug. Don't over tighten, but you do want it snug. Okay. Now we're going to insert our needle. Actually, let's put our air cap back on first. We went in and took this apart a little further. So we're going to set that in there and use the split ring into that groove, which locks it in place. That goes into place. Get it lined up correctly. And the front of these guns is laser etched with the SATA logo and the model number, and that is actually etched. If you're looking at it and it reads correctly, that is actually up. They test spray these guns at the factory. One way, they'll flip it 180 degrees, try it that way, and whichever one sprays better, they will call that up, laser engrave it, so you can always identify which side goes up. So, air cap is back on. Now we're going to reinsert the needle, and we're going to apply some grease where this needle rides in the packing. And again, that's going to avoid any air leaks in the back of the gun, and it's going to make the gun operate so much smoother. You'll definitely cut down on the wear on the packing and wear on the needle. So be sure that our pin is lined up so that the hole is facing front to rear. Insert the needle, and it should just slide right home. Next, a little bit of grease on this rear spring. Sits on the needle, and we are going to run this all the way back. A little bit of grease on these threads as well. Compress the spring and start it in. Now, what you want to do is pull your trigger all the way to the rear and continue turning this in until it stops. Okay. Now, by doing that, we determine the further rearmost portion of that needle. If I continue to turn it, you'll actually see it start to push the trigger forward as we go in. Typically, we want to set this gun up so that it's wide open. There might be some situations where you want it choked down a little bit, but typically you're going to set it wide open. Now that we have that wide open, go ahead and run that in, the lock ring, and snug everything. And that should keep everything from backing out. And that is reassembled on the SATA JET NR2000. I know it's been a little bit longer video, and if you stuck with it this long, thank you. On this channel, we're going to try to get into some more technical portions of painting, how to do things, how to take care of your equipment. So if that's the sort of thing that interests you, please subscribe and follow along, and I will try to get content up. I hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks.